I think it was around this time last year that I made a video talking about how I was struggling with motivation around meal planning, and apparently it may be a yearly tradition. In the last little while, I have found myself once again struggling to stay motivated with meal planning. So in this video, I want to talk about what wasn't working as well and how I have tweaked things to make it a little more in line with how I actually plan and cook. So I plan meals in 2-week sprints, and that's simply because I don't really like grocery shopping. And so if I can minimize the amount of times I have to go to the grocery store, then I'm a happy person. So in the beginning, when I was just getting into meal planning, I attempted to plan on a monthly basis, but I found that planning out a month ahead was just a bit too much time in terms of not really accounting for plans changing in that time frame, and also fresh food doesn't always last as long. So 2 weeks is kind of our sweet spot. I usually plan to cook about 3 meals a week. So I'll cook 2 of those meals and my partner will cook the third meal on the weekends. And then we'll just have leftovers on the alternate days and have one kind of free day for any leftovers that we haven't eaten yet, or takeout, or maybe going out. I do all of that planning in my Midori Hibino, which is my all-in-one planner for this year. And that is not going to change. We're just going to talk about how I'm going to make some changes to reduce the amount of friction that I feel when it comes to actually generating the meal plan itself and deciding what I'm going to cook for the upcoming week. So first, I'm going to touch on what the problem is in the first place. These are obviously minor problems, but I think over time they have just added up to a point where I just find myself dreading the process. And sometimes I will procrastinate on meal planning to the point where I'm planning in the car on the way to the grocery store, which isn't really great because that's how we forget things and end up having to take extra trips to the grocery store later. It really works best when I take the time to set that meal plan up front, but I do want it to be as uncomplicated as possible. I think the main issue that I have been experiencing is kind of generating the recipes that I want to cook. And honestly, that has always been the issue for me. Years ago, when I started to get into this whole meal planning thing, I realized a few things. One, I needed recipes and meals that were relatively quick to cook. So ideally would take 30 to 45 minutes. A few years ago, as part of our efforts to just discover new approachable recipes, we did meal kits for a little while. And what I really liked about the meal kits is they just kind of helped me explore like different flavors that I wouldn't have done on my own. Growing up in a household of mainly Chinese cooking, I just wasn't really exposed to like anything else. And I don't know how authentic these meals are, but they definitely encouraged me to try different spices and different flavor combinations that I just wouldn't have thought of on my own. And so what I liked about these cards at the time was I could use these images to help me decide on what to cook. So I would sometimes go through these cards and just pick something that looked appealing. And I would also get my partner to do the same. And that's how we used to pick meals. Whatever we chose, I would keep these out in our kitchen that was in a visible spot. And then when it was time to cook, I would just pull the card out and get ready to do the cooking. And you can see like certain recipes that I used often, they have like food stains all over them. They are very well used. One of the issues with these recipes, as great as they are, is I've realized over time that they aren't necessarily tailored to our eating preferences. And what I mean by that is I really love this meal, for example, because it kind of taught me how to make chicken, because I used to not really know how to cook chicken properly and I would always overcook it. But the method they use of pan frying and then finishing it off in the oven, now I always love when I make chicken. But a lot of these meals often lack in vegetables. And so usually if I make a meal like this, I may kind of follow the directions to how to make the chicken. I might sometimes make the bulgur wheat, but then I will often do a vegetable stir fry just because that's how we prefer to eat our meals. And so I noticed that I started reaching for a lot of these recipes, looking for like specific components. So if I wanted to make a meal with roast chicken, then I would look for this card just so I could remember how to make the chicken, but I wouldn't necessarily follow the rest of this recipe. I've realized that I don't really follow these recipes to a T in the same way that I used to in the very beginning. I like to think of it as like learning how to ride a bike, where in the very beginning, it was like I was on a tricycle and I just needed very specific instructions because I wasn't a very intuitive cook. And so saying like, just cook the chicken until it's ready would never work for me. But having very specific instructions around what to put the temperature in the oven to, how long to have it in the oven for before you start checking for whether it's done or not. Those kinds of things I really needed in the beginning. And then over time, I've been able to kind of let go of my training wheels and I've just been able to make adaptations based on our own preferences. Even with some of these recipes, they tend to be written for two or four people, and the stuff in the brackets is for 4 people. So sometimes I'll read these as I'm cooking and I'll follow the instructions for the 2-person and make a mistake and not use the instruction for the 4-person meal, since I always do the 4-person meal so we have leftovers. As great as these cards are, and I do recommend them if someone is wanting to kind of get started with cooking, I have kind of reached a point where I feel like I've outgrown them a little, and I've just gotten a little bit tired of always having these cards. And then if you can see, I have quite a few cards, and I've realized that there are certain recipes in here that I consistently skip over. So even though at the time I culled down my list to my favorite meals, I've realized that my actual list of staple recipes or favorite meals is even smaller than this. So another opportunity I saw was to take another pass at this and filter down to the recipes that I truly like and I truly will refer back to time and time again. The other thing that I do is in my Midori Hibino and in my other books where I would use for planning, I would have a favorite meals list. And this mostly corresponds to the cards that I just showed you. And then each year I will add more meals to the list depending on if there's a meal that I come across that I really love. So last year, my main planner was my A6 Hobonichi, and there was a turkey chili recipe that I got back in January. And I ended up making this meal throughout last year, and we continue to make it today. So when I want to make this recipe, I have to either reference this book, or what I ended up doing was I copied it out in this book. But then next year, if I still want to use the recipe, then I'll have to copy it into my next planner, which I don't really want to do. So usually when I come across a new recipe that is maybe an experimental recipe that I'm interested in trying, I will copy it out of my planner so that I can reference it when I'm cooking. But some of those recipes I don't care to make again, and some of them become hits and I find myself reaching for again and again. So I would ideally want a place to house my sort of permanent recipes so that I'm not constantly having to copy them from book to book. And I'm also not having to reference past books as well. There were quite a few recipes here, just like in the cards, where I just knew that I didn't really want to cook, and I would end up glazing over this list, and somehow it was just causing a bit of decision fatigue, and I just stopped finding this list as helpful because some of these things just don't really belong on this list anymore. I wouldn't really consider them my favorite meals. So I wasn't really finding this as helpful. So when I sit down, the idea is that I can look at this list as inspiration to help me get started. But if this list isn't really representative of what I'm really excited about, then it's not really that helpful. I've still been doing meal planning this whole time. I just haven't really been excited about it, and it's starting to feel like a lot of work. I started to review my meal cards. So I kind of went through this and I removed all of the stale recipes that I just knew I was not going to want to cook. So I filtered down, and I think I had about this many that I kept and these that I didn't. I also went through my old meal planning books. I used to use my Hobonichi Weeks as a standalone meal planner. And I went through the recipes that I had copied out in the back. And I made note of the ones that I consistently go back to. And I think you can always tell with the food stains which ones I consistently go back to. So I took note of all of the recipes that I felt like I would want to archive in a permanent place. And then I transferred them over to a more permanent archive. This is my recipe book, my more permanent archive. I will preface this by saying that this was gifted to me. So if some of these ideas are interesting to you and you are interested in creating your own recipe archive, which I think is working great in a binder system, there are other more affordable options out there that you could use to house your recipe binder. I was really excited to use this binder because I absolutely adore this binder. I think it's the perfect size, and I like that it doesn't feel overwhelming. So when I am meal planning, I'm referencing this and then I have this open. It doesn't feel like too much on my desk. I do recognize that it's not in everybody's budget to get a premium binder. And so I hope that if you are interested in creating a recipe binder, that some of these ideas will still be helpful for you and you can still achieve the same outcome, even if you don't use a leather binder. But if you are interested in using a leather binder, then let me tell you about all the specs about this one, just in case you are curious. So this is the natural Butero leather. And you can see, or I don't know if you can see, but there is a little bit of the patina where the elastic has kind of covered it. So it is darkening already in the time that I've had it. It's a much stiffer leather compared to this one is the Pueblo leather, which is, it's a lot thinner. I'm very curious to see how this ages over time. And I was curious to try a different type of leather from MeePlus. And I was expecting to prefer the Pueblo just because it's a very soft texture, but I was really surprised by this and I really love how this feels in my hand. I chose the gold spine and I was able to get a little engraving here. It says 2 roads diverged, just a line from one of my favorite poems by Robert Frost. This is one of their elastic closures, the one that doesn't have the pen loop, because I don't think I need to have a pen attached to this with this in the way that I was planning on using it. But they did send me 2 little elastic pen stickers in case I do want to attach that to the pen loop in the back. So I have the option, but I've just decided for now not to use it. On the front here, I just have this keychain that I got in Hong Kong for chrysanthemum tea. I decided to put it here because it's related to food and I just thought it was cute. And I don't really plan on taking this out of the house anyway, so I don't know. We'll see how long I leave it on here for. And then over here, I just have a charm. This is actually from Galen Leather. They sent this to me when I made a purchase from them a few years ago, and I wasn't really sure how to attach it to anything. So for now, I've just attached it to the rings, and then maybe in the future, I'll see if there's another way that I can get this charm on. Opening it up, I have this Superior Labor product backing. I saw that Laura from XOXO Lore did this in her personal sized rings binder, and I just loved it. And so I took the idea from her and I put it in here. There's no purpose for it other than I just like it. So I've got that in here. I also wanted to say before I forget, this is the personal size. So it's actually a little bit wider than an A6 and it's taller. Okay, so the first insert here is from MeePlus, and it is a yearly fold out. I think if I were using this as a planner, this would be so great for that yearly view. But for now, I'm just using it to write down the meals that I have planned so far for the year. And I just think that at the end of the year, it would be really interesting to see like which meals I planned more often than not. And when I do a review of the meals that are sort of on rotation, it'll be helpful to see like what meals am I not excited about making because I'm never planning them, or what are some meals that I haven't made in a while, that kind of thing. So that's the yearly overview. And then this is my new version of my favorite meals list or meal ideas list. So I have this fold out, this tri-fold, and I have it separated similarly to my Habino by season. So I've got spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And what's kind of cool with this is you can kind of fold it a little bit to show different seasons. So in the winter, I can kind of have this out, and I can have this side sticking out, and then in the spring, I can kind of have this out. I mean, it doesn't work for every season, and these are just all the recipes that are top favorites at the moment. And some of these I don't have actual recipes for because the recipes just live in my head. And this red dot means that the recipe is one that exists in this book. So that's kind of how I've been treating this. This is kind of like the same thing. If I want to plan by season, this is a way to get me started. And then we go into the actual recipes. So MeePlus also sent me 3 dividers. They originally come with like a black backing, which I wasn't a fan of. So I covered mine in washi tape, of course. I'm really happy with how they turned out. So this first section is what I'm calling mains, and I have categorized them kind of by protein because I realize that when I'm planning my meals, I tend to pick about 6 meals for 2 weeks, but I also like to vary the kind of proteins that I choose for the meals. So I try to avoid having like 2 or 3 beef meals in 1 week. And instead I try to have maybe 1 beef, 1 chicken, 1 vegetarian, that kind of thing. And so since I realized that I kind of choose by protein, I've separated my recipes into different proteins. And so for example, in beef, I've used this tri-fold, and I have put all of the recipes that I have in the beef section over here, and I did it in pencil because I'm anticipating over time, if there's a certain recipe that I want to remove or there's a certain recipe that I want to add, then I have the option to erase and, update it. So it doesn't feel as permanent as having it written out in here. And these are just meant to be inspirational. So there's nothing wrong with having these lists. I think it is helpful to have it in this book, but, I also like the fact that I have the recipes in here. And then I used these are all inserts from MeePlus, by the way. This one is their daily insert. And I really like it. I don't know, there was something about the structure they added to it that I really liked, to the point where I even took one of their blank grid papers and used the same layout. Like I just used a pencil to kind of outline the same layout. So the way I have kind of set it up is here I have the title of the recipe. I have the direction, then I have the ingredients, and then I have the directions. So if I'm choosing a certain recipe that I want to make, I can go to the recipe, I can take a look at all the ingredients, and that's what I can use to set up my shopping list. And then when I'm actually cooking, I can take this out, I can set it up in my kitchen so I can reference this. And I like that I can kind of, I have a little stand, like a little wooden stand that's meant to be for iPads, but it's perfect for paper like this. So I do appreciate that I can just kind of take it out and reference it that way. And this is all written in a waterproof ink. So in theory, if it does get wet, it shouldn't ruin the recipe, but we'll see over time. These are all of my beef meals. I haven't decided what I want to do with this top corner, so I've left it blank for now, but I was thinking it could be good for maybe categorization or tags. I'm not too sure, but if you have any ideas, let me know. Or maybe I can just put a little decoration in there. I'm not too sure. Yeah, so this is all of my beef related menus. And I still have to update a few recipes as well. And then this one is chicken and turkey. So I have turkey recipes here and I have chicken recipes here. Yeah, I still have a few that I need to update, but I will do that in time. The next category is seafood. And for now, I only have one meal. We do cook a lot of salmon, but we don't really follow a recipe for that because we have been cooking salmon for so long. So that's something that kind of lives in my head, and I don't really need it written down for now. And then I have some vegetarian recipes. So I have a few soups that were actually recipes that came from viewers. So I've got this super stuffed miso soup from Lillian. And then I've got this corn chowder from No Matter, which I haven't made in a while because our blender is broken and we don't have an immersion blender. I miss this soup. I made it a lot last year when I got the recipe because it's delicious. And then I just have extra paper. So one thing I really love is this paper is so thin. This paper is Spark paper from MeePlus. I think it's like as thin as Hobonichi paper. So you can fit so much in here. Like I don't know how many extras, but I have room for so many more recipes, which I think is amazing. The next section I've called methods and base recipes. So this is more so around specific methods on making things. For example, with roasted chicken, one of the recipes that I really enjoy is this harissa roasted chicken, but sometimes I don't necessarily want to use the same spices. And so I realized that I was always pulling out this recipe because I wanted to remember specific things like what temperature to turn the pan to sear the chicken. What temperature should I preheat the oven to? Roughly how many tablespoons of spice should I use? Because if you tell me to just be intuitive on spices, I have ruined things before because I have put way too much or too little. So I really appreciate the proportions of things, at least for me, that I find that to be really helpful. As I don't always want to use this specific recipe, I've kind of pulled out certain things that I tend to use so I can kind of build my own meal by component. And that's actually a much more intuitive way for me to cook as well. So sometimes like I just want to do roast chicken with some roast veggies and roast potatoes. It's not so much like a full meal that I need a recipe card for, but what I do need is to remember how to cook chicken. So that's why I have these like sort of standalone recipes. Another example is coconut rice. Sometimes I make rice in my rice cooker, but I really loved from one of the recipes in here their method for making coconut rice. And so often I'll make a meal like a Thai curry, but I'll want to make coconut rice to accompany it with. And so I like having just a separate place that I can remember how to do something like this. That's really what these recipes are for. Here's like a pie crust. So whenever I make quiche, I like to make a pie crust. And I don't have a specific recipe for quiche. I just know I use about this many eggs, and whatever leftover veggies we have in the fridge is what gets tossed into the quiche. But what I can't do from memory is make pie crust. And so I like to have this here available to me. So when I do make it, I have a place to reference. And then here, this third section, I'm not sure if this is really the best place for it, but I wasn't sure what to call it, but it's kind of like sides or add-ons to meals. So they are recipes, but they're not meals on their own. I actually think coconut rice would fit in with that. So right now I have sesame ginger dressing. So this is a salad dressing recipe that I came across last summer, and I really enjoyed it. I was making it all the time. I just wanted to have it somewhere that I could access quickly because I was always having to look up that recipe. I did have it in here, but I don't always want to be referencing this. So that's kind of what I had in mind for this section. And that is my recipe binder. So it's very simple, but I'm really happy with how this has come along. It means I can recycle these recipe cards, which are bulky and kind of taking up space, and they're not really serving me in the way that they were once upon a time. So when I meal plan, I can show you. I just finished meal planning for this upcoming week, the next sprint. We are going grocery shopping tomorrow. So here's an example of it in practice. When I was meal planning, I looked in our freezer to see what we had. Usually it's the proteins that we have in the freezer. Then I came up with some meal ideas, and since I knew that we had some white fish in the freezer, that was an example of me looking for a new recipe because I know that I don't have any recipes in here for white fish. So I did actually look up a fish tacos recipe that I'm going to try, and I don't know if I'm going to like it. So I prefer to put it in here because if I do really like it, maybe it'll eventually earn a spot in my permanent recipe binder, but if not, then it'll just live in here and that'll be that. So when I'm cooking this in the coming week, then I can reference this. So I still will use this book for new experimental recipes, but this is more like the archive for permanent ones, if that makes sense. So then I come up with about 6 meal ideas, 4 that I think I can cook, and then 2 that I will assign to my partner. He always likes to make pizza every 2 weeks, so that's an easy one. And then I put down like a pasta meal for him. And then once I have these meal ideas, then I will reference them in here if I need to, and generate the shopping list based on that. And there are a few meals in here that I don't have formal recipes for, like vermicelli stir fry. That's just a meal that my mom taught me. So it is one of those meals that lives in my head, but maybe one day I'll write it down because I probably shouldn't rely on my memory so much. That's how we create the shopping list. Then I take the meals and I slot them in to next week and the week after. Sometimes I don't necessarily know what my schedule is going to look like 2 weeks out. Instead of slotting them out here, I've been adding the meals that I plan to make this week over in this side here. And so right before, like Sunday night before this week, I'll probably have a better idea of like which nights I'm going to be working late, and then I can figure out the meals based on my schedule. So I still have the 3 meals. We still have all the ingredients for those meals, but I haven't really slotted them out yet because my schedule can change. So that's basically how I have been approaching my meal planning. Everything here is pretty much the same, except the way that I'm generating ideas or the way that I'm getting ideas is just a bit different. So I have this kind of permanent archive where I have a few different ways that I can get inspiration. So when it comes to generating meals, I can look at this and I can see what I've been planning, or I can look at this for additional ideas. I can also look at my meals by season if I want, or I can look at other seasons and, pick meals depending on what stands out to me. And I can also flip by protein. So I can say, I want to pick 2 beef meals, 2 chicken meals, 1 vegetarian, 1 fish. So I can go here and I can just pick, like I can look at what is available here. And then I can just go quickly to chicken, maybe turkey, pick something from there, and so on. This is not an exhaustive list because I don't have recipes for everything that I cook, which is why it's good to have this as well. I'm really happy with how this binder has turned out. You don't have to use a really fancy binder. Although I am a huge fan of MeePlus, I do recognize that this was gifted to me. So my intention for sharing is to share the idea of using a binder to house a system like this, which I think truly does work better than a bound book in this case. And I think just the fact that this is a relatively thin book, it just feels a lot more appealing to me personally than the really big rings binder options out there. But you could certainly just get any kind of binder that works for you. Find the paper that works best for you. You could even like print your recipes. You don't have to write them out by hand like I did. I just didn't want to fuss with the printer, so I just took my time filling out the recipes, and I will continue to add to this over time. If there's even the smallest opportunity to make a mundane task more exciting or more interesting, then I am going to take it. If you are interested in MeePlus, I will leave a full list of all the customizations that I got for this personal sized Slimpad, as well as the different inserts that I used. So I have this yearly overview. I have this gridded trifold. I have these daily pages that are in very lightweight paper, which I think is honestly the key for making me feel confident that this is going to grow with me over time as I add more recipes. And this little trifold is actually really fun. I really enjoy this as well. So yeah, I've been really pleased. And if you don't want to use the dailies, I just got the blank page. It was very easy to create that kind of layout, which I really like. Well, that is everything that I wanted to share with you today. Let me know if you have any questions. If you do meal planning, I'm curious if you have any tips or tricks that you could share with me, because I'm always looking to make it more exciting or more enjoyable. If you're still here, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you soon in the next video.